Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us on this Quincus Talks on building sustainable supply chain solution. My name is Olivier Adam. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Quincus, and I'm delighted to be hosting this very exciting panel. This is a subject that's very close to my heart, and but first, before we go into the subject, I want to introduce the three panelists that I have with me today. First panelist is Omar from Westbike. Omar has been for the past 4 years focusing his efforts on providing a green solution for the logistics industry. He was appointed CEO of Westbike in 2017, and he has successfully transformed the business into a leading pioneer for zero-emission courier service, building the company into one of the largest bicycle courier company in Indonesia. So really excited to have you with us, Omar, today. Our second panelist is Dominic Rego. Dominic is the Managing Director of Logistics Executive in Asia Pacific. His role is focused on developing the APAC practice, leveraging his supply chain and commercial industry experience to provide superior collaboration through innovation, digitization, and value to clients. Thank you for joining us, Dominic. And finally is Martin Dudek. Martin is a close colleague of mine. He's the Vice President of Partnership and Strategy here at Quincus. He joined Quincus 2 years ago to bolster the mission of disrupting global supply chains through digitalization. Previously, Martin has held executive positions in complex logistics operations such as DHL and SingPost. So it will be great to have his input and his insights as well into this particular aspect of the logistics chain. Thank you for joining us, Martin. Before we start, I just want to mention to everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our social media in the next few days. Great. So we will start with a few questions that we've prepared, and we will keep a good portion of this webinar for open Q&A. Ahead of the webinar, we have received some questions already, and I know that we've just opened now the Q&A chat as well. So if you have any questions at any point, please do not hesitate, send them to us. And in the second half of this session, we will be going over all the questions that we've received. So without further ado, I'll start with our first question. And really, the topic is around the current situation on green supply chain. And just before I jump into my first question, I want to give a little bit of insight. I've done some research in the past few days around this. And really, the reality of things is that 11% of global CO2 emissions as of today come from non-passenger transport. So that means anything that is freight, shipping, you name it, is all really, it's 11%. That's 4 billion tons of emissions each year. And that's actually nearly half of all of transport emissions. So when we talk about transport, right, like airlines is quite often pointed as the guilty party of global emissions, but it's only a fraction or a portion of all of those transports. And really, in summary, is that so the sector is a high growing emitter of CO2 over the past years, and we really want to start tackling this at a more acute level. So with this kind of mindset, and starting with my first question, Dominic, I will start with you. What are some of the initiatives that you've seen different players in the industry put in place to achieve a greener supply chain?
Yeah, great question there. So from my perspective, we've been working very closely with our clients around green supply chains. And more to that point, it's not just about the carbon emissions, but more importantly, how does the carbon emissions get derived from? So some of the initiatives we've been working on is a B double, so that you would have seen the large 240-footer containers getting moved with one drivetrain. It's a technology that's been around in Australia for many years, but bringing that into Asia has been a real catalyst in reducing carbon emissions in its entirety, really. So measuring empty miles from a KPI perspective, looking at fill rates with our clients and utilization of trucks itself, and making sure that from a backhaul perspective, that we have optimization and the management of that optimization throughout. So that 11% is a considerable number. And at the end of the day, when it comes to a green supply chain, it's all about sustainability being the broader topic, and suppliers and businesses operating in a responsible and ethical way. So at the end of the day, from my perspective, sustainable supply chains or green supply chains are more stable, and they anticipate regulatory developments, and at the end of the day, reduce the reputational risks of our clients.
That's great. Thank you, Dominic. And Omar, I would love to hear your take as well on this question. It's coming from Westbike, which is a green logistic provider. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, I think in the past, I guess, for 3 years, we've been working a lot with logistic companies in trying to reduce their carbon footprint by providing an alternative fleet, basically, which is a bicycle. And it turns out that a lot of these logistic players are now much more aware, obviously, are much more educated and aware regarding the sustainability aspect of logistics. So we're very happy to work with these companies. And I think, I think for us, last mile is just a small part of the supply chain. There are still a lot of parts of the supply chain that needs to be, I guess, provide a greener solution. But from our end, in the last mile part of it, we are seeing quite a positive feedback from the logistic players, and I think in the coming years there will be much more solutions in that area.
Understood. Thank you, Omar. And just a follow-up on what you just mentioned. What's interesting is you mentioned that logistics players are a lot more aware around sustainability now than they used to be, and since they come to you as the answer, how critical do you think logistics companies still see reducing their carbon emission? Is it really important now for them, or is it still a nice to have?
I think maybe a few years ago it's still nice to have. It's much more of a, I guess, much more of a gimmick, I guess, if I may say. But now, once we've been working with them closely, they now understand it's not just for PR's sake, but in terms of the efficiency, productivity, it's much more better, of course. And then I think one of the key drivers that we have now is that governments are also coming into the space as well. There are quite a few regulations that they're trying to impose as well. For instance, a real case study in Jakarta is that the local government are in talks of having a regulation on protocol roads in the CBD areas and highly dense areas, and they are planning to actually ban motorcycles and other vehicles that emit carbon. They want to impose fees as well in those type of areas, and that regulation alone will have a huge impact on logistic operations, right? Hence, I think that type of driver, I think, will push logistic companies to be much more aware and willing to, plan on switching to a greener solution, I think.
Great, thank you, Omar. And Martin, I guess so far we heard from Dominic that there's some of the initiatives that they're looking at the bigger picture, right? Where are the carbon emissions being derived from? And from Omar, obviously, we've heard about having a carbon neutral or zero carbon emission last mile delivery. And as he mentioned, there's a lot more pieces of the puzzle than that, but it's a great part of the puzzle to remove the carbon emission from. Martin, any other insights from your point of view in terms of initiatives that you've seen in the industry that will help us achieve a greener supply chain?
Yeah, thanks. Good question, and I think it all comes together from what Dominic and Omar has said. But if you go back, it started already quite a while back, where especially high volume delivery companies, express companies, started to use electric vans, and that is actually becoming more and more the norm. In the UK, key players up to 400-500 vehicles are electric already. Let it be scooters, especially in the urban area. So electric vans and utilizing the new not technology, but the new environment and battery driven entities is started many years back. It's almost like a given today. I've seen as well, and that is quite interesting, utilizing warehouse roofs as real estate for solar panels, especially when you look at warehousing, which is a huge area which is not utilized at all. So there are companies which place panels across these huge areas free of cost, and then actually giving the warehouse operator and owner free electricity, as well as a percentage of the electricity they sell to the grid, which means more and more of these services are being utilized, reducing, of course, and carbon emission and focusing on the green supply chain. What is happening now more is the assets are there to become far more green, and it is the utilization, smart utilization is now at the forefront using technology, which means maximizing even these already electric vans to a maximum and maximize the assets and drive efficiencies accordingly. So if you look at the entire industry, which is potentially 10 to 20% underutilized, technology allows now this to be more optimized, therefore delivering the same kind of volume or more volume with the same assets, and with that, retaining and reducing the environmental impact.
Great, thank you, Martin. And I think I like the example of using the warehouse roof for solar panels, and even in a not very sunny country like the UK, where I am right now, we do see solar panels being installed more and more often. I think that combined with the electric vehicles that you mentioned, which have batteries, you can then start generating that electricity, storing it, and then using it to also recharge those electric vehicles. So I think that there's a lot of potential synergies there. So that's fantastic. Thank you. I want to move to the second topic, which is really the reality of the world of the past 12 to 18 months now in this pandemic world that we've been. And we've got obviously great news around the vaccine all over the world, but we're still early stage, as we know. And we also know that in this past year and a half, the growth of logistics has been phenomenal. There's been a massive growth in online shopping. It was already a fast growing industry, right? We all know this, but no one could have predicted the speed at which it grew. I mean, I'm looking again here in the UK, grocery deliveries, which was already quite well advanced. There were no slots available to do any deliveries for weeks and months on end, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And there was hundreds and hundreds of additional delivery vehicles and drivers hired and that volume is remaining there today, right? Like those drivers don't go anywhere. People are still ordering from those. So really what we see is that the pandemic has increased the demand of logistics, but also made it more complex, right? If we think about vaccine, right? Especially the beginning of the vaccine distribution, with the Pfizer vaccine needing to be stored at minus 70 degrees and can only be going on for a few days before it's wasted. So all of that is adding complexity. And so, Omar, what I would like to hear from your side, I think it's interesting from a bike delivery perspective. What do you think needs to be done to adapt to this fast change, right? Where not only you've got a bigger volume, but you also have more complex. And how do you adapt to that change while remaining sustainable?
Yeah, so I think for the past year and a half since the pandemic, obviously there's a huge spike on deliveries, especially in e-commerce, marketplace, online groceries, and I think one of the solution is that I think we need to be very agile and be able to adapt very quickly in these uncertain times. And I think what we have to do is basically leverage technology. I think is one of the key elements, key driver that we need to really leverage in terms of how we can not overwork our couriers. I mean, with the volumes getting higher, we tend not to add more couriers because I think we should not forget that there's also a moral obligation that we had for these couriers regarding their health and safety because they are at risk of contracting the virus very easily. So we had to, leverage technology such as, our partners at Quincus to help us really maximize our couriers to get, maximize capacity, optimizing our routes. And so I think that made us really be very agile in these uncertain times.
Great, thank you, Omar. Dominic, do you want to follow?
Yeah, I would. I'd love to. I mean, look, I think the coronavirus pandemic has forced many organizations to rethink their supply chains. It's the perfect opportunity to restart and start again a sustainable, ingrained future at every stage within the supply chain itself. That being the case, I think gone are the days of this disruptive consumer desperation of panic buying, toilet paper and searching for flour in the grocery stores. This is all about now asking the question around what do we really want and what we want to do the big reset on. That being the case, for what coronavirus has done to supply chains, there's really two different answers to that question. One obviously is around this big spike in e-commerce, but from an e-commerce perspective, and linking that to the green supply chain, it doesn't help us from any sustainability perspectives. I mean, e-commerce has a ratio of about 1.3 line items per purchase. Traditionally in a retail sense, you're up to at least 50 lines per purchase. So the amount of packaging and the amount of waste that occurs through that as well has been evolved through the coronavirus and the e-commerce spike. But it also creates many other problems within the supply chain itself. And at the end of the day, business owners, we shouldn't hurry to get back to the pre-COVID performance, for a quick solution. This is all about long-term goals, making sure that there's an opportunity to rebuild and clean the path for a reset going forward. So as good as the coronavirus has allowed us to adapt and survive, it's also created many other green and other sustainability issues around waste and packaging and so forth that comes along with it. So there's pros and cons on both sides there.
Yes, definitely, and I think that's one of the concern, right? The world was moving, even a non-logistic example, before coronavirus, it became common and fashionable, I would say, to say, oh, bring your own cup to get your coffee, right, at a coffee shop. And now it's like, no way, right? We don't want your cup because we don't know if it's, and for valid reason. I'm not saying that we should try to get people sick to save a cup, but it does show that the world is trying to move into more greener initiative, sustainable mechanisms in place. And then yet coronavirus did force some reset on some of those aspects. Martin, anything you want to add to the subject?
Yeah, perhaps two couple of points. The observation is that the behavior of individuals has changed as well. And I think before, no one really took measures to do changes. There are two aspects to it. First of all, people are prepared to pay a little bit higher if it is in a green environment. That is one thing we should not forget. But the thinking around it, people make sacrifices to an extent which is sustainable, but it creates a new way of living and reduces the issues at hand. Now, the same actually has to happen in the industry. And that is, think differently. Before it was, what do I have? Look at my assets. I'm big. I've got 400 aircraft. I've got so many vehicles. I can actually do supply across the world. Now, I don't like the word sharing economy because it's overused and misused as well. But there is a lot of assets. There is a lot of transportation assets around, logistics, warehouses, but they're not fully utilized because the individual operator doesn't have potentially the volume and or is overcapacitated. So therefore, sharing and utilizing underutilized assets becomes, I think, quite critical. 20 to 30% are empty, and to certain areas or environments, when they need more delivery or need to do higher volumes, they purchase assets. So utilizing what's on the market, third parties, vendors, and work together to optimize capacities, I think is the first step. But that brings the point, how do you measure that? Because if you do that and you say, all right, what did I contribute? I think the next step as well, and that is something which I think will occupy most of us in the industry, how do we connect a matrix, a carbon matrix to every process? And if we look at that, and if we do that, every process can contribute to the bigger picture. And once we can measure it, we can take accountability. Accountability means you have visibility as well. And that in itself, I think, maybe there is a modus which is coming up. Instead of saying, these are my costs, these are the carbon footprints or the neutrality I can achieve if I transport your item. So measuring it and being conscious, working towards a reduced carbon footprint rather than what is the volume I can actually support.
Great, thanks, Martin. And that's a fantastic segue. We should have rehearsed that because I don't think we could have rehearsed this better. But it's a fantastic segue, Martin, for our last topic. And I see we have questions, by the way, just before we jump to the last topic. We have questions coming in now from the audience. So we'll move into the last topic and then we'll open it up to the audience for all the Q&As. But so Martin, that last topic that I've been mentioning is really, what is the future of the green supply chain? And you already start touching some of those points. Where are we going, and what are the benefits for businesses, and how can we convince businesses to go ahead? And that primary way of convincing them is most likely by showing them the benefit. So from your point of view, Martin, continuing a little bit on what you just said, what do you think would be the best way to convince the big logistics players out there, the big shipping companies, but also the smaller ones, right? To go green. So to work with Westbike, let's say, if they have deliveries in Jakarta, then to collaborate with a local company who will give them carbon neutral deliveries.
Very good question. I think it goes with the time where we are today versus 10, 15 years ago. And it comes down to brand image as well. Consumers embrace brands which are green. So we need to articulate that. So a benefit is definitely brand image and improve sustainability. Clearly articulating in the markets that as a company, we are partnering with many entities in order to reduce and to make the environment more green, and of course, offer the service which is important. For the individual company, I think there are two aspects. One is, of course, the brand, but at the same time, because of the increase in volume and the demand in the market, in terms of transportation, because of online engagement, is ultimately the ease using technology, reducing costs through that, and especially enterprise companies, depending where in the world, their incentives and budgets are allocated as well in order to reduce footprint. Normally, it's always the statement of it's too expensive to be green, but with technology, you can offset the savings of 20 to 30% cost reduction can then be utilized in order to drive green energy. As a last point, I think it is, and there will be a mandate, and there should be forums and governments which hold companies accountable to actually produce evidence that they are engaging in greener technologies, or at least embracing change to reduce the carbon footprints. And I think with that, it will become almost a mandate to be active, not internally, but externally and verbal as well.
Good, thank you, Martin. And Omar, what is the key elements that you get to convince your clients to use Westbike, right? Is it really the green cred that it gives them? Is it the cost benefit? Is there any other arguments? What is the one primary element for you?
Yeah, I think one is definitely the brand and the credibility that they're using green solutions. And I think it's also because that I think their customer or their clients are also demanding them, you could say, to be more, I guess, more green or more ethical, so on and so forth. So I think the consumer also drives them to switch to a more a greener solution. And secondly, I think we've been proving that I guess there's a stigma that green solutions are expensive, and I think a lot of companies are afraid that if they switch to green, it's going to be much more expensive. So I think we at Westbike has been successfully convinced them that it's not expensive. Secondly, I think in terms of the performance itself, we can do a much better job. So I think one is brand image, and secondly, I think the performance will speak for itself.
Great, thank you, Omar. No, that's fantastic. And Dominic, so Omar, you mentioned that there is a stigma, which is true, that it's quite often wrong, that green is not necessarily more expensive, but the brand remains a key element. Dominic, I would just love, as a final point, and then the questions are piling up, so costs and value. And you gave some great examples at the beginning of the talk. Show us how green can also be actually a cost-saving element.
Absolutely. So look, from a true supply chain sense, customer loyalty, brand new reputation, creativity, innovation, they're all great. But from my perspective, the large projects that get the funding and actually gets the awareness are the ones that are driven by profitability. Because at the end of the day, cost and removing wastage within the supply chain, hence driving profitability, is the key driver that gets the attention of the management. looking at the supply chain networks, reordering and getting the best supply chain networks out there that are the most cost effective, certainly are the ones that raise the attention at the C-suite level, conveying to the stakeholders that there's buy-in, first of all, making sure there's a clear vision to make all this happen, as well as a true business case. At the end of the day, a business case gets driven from a decision-making around tangible benefits. And each of these tangible benefits, when you concentrate well enough into it, you actually get sustainable benefits, because at the end of the day, they're all cost-driven. So from our perspective, looking at the supply chain from a cost and profitability drives the green element as a direct correlation.
Great. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And I do want to jump on some of the questions. We've actually got two directly for you, Omar. And so I'll start with one of them, which is, do you believe it is time to switch distribution fleet in Indonesia to an electric fleet? And it's just about generic, right? It's not just about Westbike, but just about your knowledge about Indonesia.
I think, yeah, definitely. I believe we must switch to EVs, as soon as possible. Climate change is already happening. I don't think we can afford to lose time on that. And I think that starting this year, we are seeing more EV players in Indonesia, and we are seeing that more EV players are partnering with logistic companies, which is very good to see. And I think we at Westbike are also developing our own battery-powered cargo bikes. Definitely, it's not going to be easy. There are still a lot of challenges, I think, in terms of the infrastructure for instance, the charging station, whether the battery capacity is enough for a whole day's operation, are the parts and maintenance are readily available, etc. But I think we just need to approach the challenge head on and start now. And I'm very happy to see a lot of the big players actually are coming into the EV electric vehicles, and starting to partner with big logistic companies as well.
Great. So now is the time. That's what I get. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Omar. I've got two questions here that kind of build on each other. So the first question is, what are the challenges faced by today businesses that hinder them from practicing green supply chain? And the other one, which is a country-specific question around the examples around Pakistan, where only huge organizations pay attention to sustainability, and the vast majority don't. And I think we had some insights a little bit earlier about this, and maybe Dominic, you want to take a first stab at that. Like, how do we target the consciousness of business owners around this?
Yeah, so look, first of all, there are different levels of maturity when it comes to the adoption of technology when it comes to sustainability. And it's all driven around infrastructure as well. So, so making sure that, understanding where the country is at from a infrastructure perspective, and then adopting the appropriate technology that then gives the benefit back into the actual supply chains within the organization. Yes, it's been said that only the large companies have a budget for green and sustainable supply chains, but there are some very simple things that can be done, and it doesn't even have to be down the EV path. Even just measuring, regardless of which geographic area you're in, even measuring empty miles. Or empty kilometers, I should say, looking at fill rates, managing effective backhaul optimizations. These are all very simple things that can be done that delivers significant cost improvements as well as green initiatives through that anyway. So really, it's all around the level of maturity and what best to adopt when it comes to the right appropriate technology to make this happen.
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. And Martin, you were mentioning earlier about being also people-led, right? And I think that's a new question that came in the meantime, which is how can sustainability and logistics be brought more into focus in developing nations like Vietnam? And I see all those questions having some of the same fundamentals, where a lot of it is people-led. So, Martin.
Yeah, it's a good question, and what Dominic mentioned, I think, is quite critical because, first of all, the perception that it is expensive to become green is, from a technology point of view, is based on systems. Systems are very expensive. When we talk about technology, the same perception is there, but it is not, right? And I think education and focusing on maximizing and driving efficiencies within their own four walls of their company. That means their delivery environment is something which doesn't cost much money, like investing in electric vehicles, for example, but utilizing existing technology depending on the application in order to maximize and maximize efficiency and reduce, as Dominic said as well, empty kilometers. Right? I think that is the very first step. And if you do that aggregated in a country like Vietnam as well, small companies, big companies, all of that adds up. And I think by showcasing that and taking an example, it will ultimately appeal to the people. I think one key change in the last 3-4 years is that technology has become far more applicable across all industries, but the understanding of technology is perceived very complex, but it is not. So I think education around how technology can help companies in a simple way becomes a way potentially going forward, right? I just want to quickly jump onto, and I saw that question in Pakistan, how to get consciousness of the business owners, because only the big companies perhaps look at it. I think it is a combination of regulations as well. If the infrastructure, of course, is not good, but the regulatory environment is focusing of actually setting certain rules and expectations which are critical, which can be offset from tax potentially, if it's tax, if there are tax incentives, by starting using certain technologies, reducing or increasing your green footprint. I think that would help as well.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Martin. And I'm aware we're now out of time. We do have more questions, but obviously I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I first want to say a big thank you to Omar, Dominic, and Martin. I want to make sure that if anyone has any questions, can you please let the audience know the best way to reach out to you? Dominic, what's the best way to reach if anyone has questions for you?
Look, I think we should provide a link to any questions. From my perspective, email is probably the best way forward, which will be provided after this. And we can also expand on some of the facts that we've provided here, so that you can use that into some of your business practices that you're going forward with in your own organizations.
That's great. Thank you, Dominic. Omar, what's the best way if anyone wants to reach to you?
Sure. I think they can just email me or message me through LinkedIn. That would be fine also.
LinkedIn, perfect. Thank you. And Martin, I will assume either LinkedIn or email as well for you. You're muted, Martin.
Yeah, absolutely right. And following Omar and Dominic, our website is available as well, and emailing me directly, of course, and making available the forum to communicate as well. LinkedIn. Okay. So I think there are many ways. Just contact me directly as well. Thank you.
Great, perfect, thank you. And so thank you again to our 3 panelists. Everyone, please fill out the survey that is currently available in Zoom, and that's it. I wish you a very great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Well done, Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you.